Hi everyone! Today's video is a tutorial for this purse organizer by Sotak Patterns. This organizer is great for people who switch bags often and want to keep things organized without all the hassle. There are 13 pockets total. There are 6 on the outside, there are 6 on the inside, plus the main compartment. Another great thing about this pattern is how customizable it is. You can change the number of pockets and the sizes of them, and you can also make this all in one fabric, or you can use lots of different fabrics. Many thanks to Svetlana, the designer of this pattern, for allowing me to film this tutorial. The link to this pattern and all the supplies and tools that I used will be in the description below this video. Your first step is going to be to cut out all your pieces and fuse your interfacings. Then gather your notions like your snaps and your zippers. Note that I will not be giving out any sort of measurements or numbers because you need to purchase the pattern in order to make this project. The first step is to make our pockets, and to do that we need our binding that goes at the top. You can see right here that I have my pieces all labeled, and that just makes it easier to keep track of them since they're all rectangles of varying sizes. So the first step is going to be to fold each binding piece lengthwise, wrong sides together, so the right side is facing out, and you're just going to iron it. Then what I do is I iron all of the pieces in half, so then each piece is cooled off a little bit when I go to the next step, which is to fold the raw edges to the center seam. You can see right here that I'm doing that. Just be very careful not to burn your fingers. You can use a tool like a stiletto to hold the fabric in place if you are concerned that you might accidentally burn yourself with the iron. Then you're going to fold the entire piece of binding in half, so now all your raw edges are enclosed inside of the binding. And then you're going to repeat on all 3 of those binding pieces. So now you're going to take your exterior slip pocket pieces. You're going to have an outer, or an exterior rather, and a lining, and you're going to place them wrong sides together. Then you're going to take some clips or pins and clip them together at the top edge, and this is where you're going to baste. And then use the seam allowance that is given in the pattern. And then where you basted right there is where you're going to add your binding. And you're just going to place that, push it all the way so that the edge of the fabric is right up against the fold of the binding, and you're going to clip that together to hold it in place. And then you're going to switch to a regular stitch length. I use a 3. Then you are going to stitch that binding in place. Then just remove the clips as you go. And this footage is sped up, so it looks like I'm sewing a lot faster than I am. Definitely take your time on this. Don't rush, because you'll have better results, especially if you are a beginner. You can see here I'm just ironing the fabric to get the creases out, and I'm repeating the exact same process because these 2 pockets are identical. So once again here I'm basting to hold the pieces together so that I can put the binding on them. Now I'm grabbing my second piece of binding and repeating that process. And then don't forget to put your stitch length back to a 3 or whatever length that you chose to use. Then sew that binding in place. So next, you're going to set those aside, grab your mesh piece, and get your third piece of binding, and you're going to use the same method to bind the top of your mesh. So just make sure that the edge of the mesh is all the way up against the fold of the binding. And then use your usual stitch length to sew that piece of binding onto the mesh. Now we're going to grab the exterior main panel, place it right side up, and you're going to layer one of your slip pockets with the mesh piece right on top of that. And then you're going to clip all three of those pieces together. You'll want to be generous with the clips to prevent the layers from shifting as you're sewing them together. And you can see here I used a ruler just to make sure that everything was nice and straight and even. And then for this, you can use a basting stitch to sew at the seam allowance mentioned in the pattern. You're going on the sides, along the bottom, and then up the other side. So you're going to hold everything in place. Make sure you take your time and don't stretch or shift any of these layers so everything remains nice and straight and even. So next thing you want to do is grab a ruler and you're going to measure in. First I just did a little bit of trimming there. You're going to measure a line. The number is given in the pattern and I'm using a Chaco liner. You can use any marking method of your choice to mark the stitching line. And then I'm just securing that with some pins just to prevent shifting. Then I'm going to take that to the sewing machine. Make sure you have your regular stitch length, which again for me was 3 millimeters. Use whatever works for you, and then don't forget to back stitch. And then that chalk can just get brushed away. And you can see here I added 2 rivets. That's completely optional. The ones I used were 9 millimeters. Then we're going to add a pocket to that panel. So this is the zipper pocket lining piece, and you can see that I ironed that to get it all free of creases. And then I'm going to be marking where I'm going to make the zipper opening. The numbers for this are given in the pattern. This is a pretty standard procedure for a pocket like this. It's often called a welt pocket, except there are that might not be the technical name for it because there aren't any actual little welts on it. It's just kind of an opening in the middle of a fabric panel. So you can see what I did right there. And then we have our main panel that we just put the pockets on. And then I'm just measuring to make sure everything is centered and the appropriate space from the top. And I'm pinning that into place. Clips wouldn't really work for this application because the fabric is too far in from the edge. Then I'm going to use a small stitch length of 2.0, and I am sewing along that rectangle that I just drew. You want to use a small stitch length because you will need to, after the step, cut extremely close to those corners that you just stitched. And that just maintains the integrity of the seam by doing that. So you're going to remove your pins, and then we need to cut that open. So what I like to do is I fold it in half, make sure it's perfectly straight, make one little snip, and then I'm cutting along that little line that I drew earlier. So you're cutting up the center of that rectangular box, and then about a ½ inch from the end, you're going to be cutting kind of a V shape. And you need to be very, very careful. Remember to cut very slowly. This footage is sped up. Cut very slowly and get right up to that stitching, but without cutting it. This takes a bit of patience. And now you can see here that I have pushed that pocket lining to the wrong side of our panel. And I am just trying to get it all straightened and smoothed out so I can iron it. Now, if you have a wool pressing mat like I do, you're going to see here that I tried something different, and I pinned directly into the ironing mat just to hold everything in place, because it's going to want to fight you until you've gotten it pressed into place. And especially those pockets, if you're getting some little pleats in the corners of the pockets there, you're going to want to go back and make sure you've clipped close enough to those corners of that seam that you just did. And you're going to see me do this exact pocket again later in the video, and I included it both pockets because this technique is just so very commonly used in bag making that the more practice you can get, the better you'll be. So you can see there we have a nice rectangle box, and now we get to add our zipper. I'm using zipper tape. So I am just sewing the two ends together and then just hitting with a lighter so it doesn't unravel. So it's zipper by the yard that I'm using instead of a pre-made zipper of the exact length that I need. And here I'm using double stick tape. You don't want to pin a zipper like this because it'll end up being wavy after you've sewn it. So double-sided tape is a really great option, or you can use a fabric tack glue. I just find this easier. Now we got our tape with the paper removed, and I'm just placing it centered inside that opening. And then just press it down to get the tape to stick. And then go back to a 3-stitch length. And you're going to be sewing very, very close, about 1/8 of an inch from that folded edge of that box that you just made. Because you want to make sure that you catch the zipper in your seam. And be very, very careful. For the sides there, you might want to count the stitches just to make sure that they're the same on each end, so your rectangle is perfectly straight. You don't want a wonky rectangle. And then be sure to backstitch and then trim any loose threads. So now we've got a nice zippered hole in the side, and you can see what I'm about to do here is fold up that pocket lining, and that's going to form the actual pocket. So we want a nice lined pocket, and you can see right here I am pinning that together along the top just to hold everything in place while I sew that all closed. And then you're going to start at the bottom corner by the fold and sew it, and just be very careful folding your back panel there out of the way as you sew so you don't get it caught in the seam. And then you're pivoting at your corners, folding it out of the way again, and then don't forget to backstitch. And that side of our organizer is completely done. Look at that. There's our pocket lining. And then now we have the other side. And first you can add an optional snap before you add the other slip pocket that you made. You can see here that I'm fusing a scrap of fusible interfacing just to give it some extra reinforcement, since a snap is going to be something that gets pulled on a lot. I want to make sure that it does not tear out of our project after it's been stitched. And this is a cam snap, and again the links to everything I use are in the description below this video. It's just a regular plastic cam snap, and then that's been applied. And then here is our slip pocket. We need to put the other half of our snap on there, so I'm just making sure that I install the snap in the right location. And I'm using a little awl to poke a hole and that's where the prong of the snap goes. And then I'm using another piece of interfacing on this pocket lining piece just to reinforce it again. Then we install the second half of our snap and then test it out, and it fits. All right, now we need to baste that pocket into place. So you can see here that I'm about to clip everything together. But first I want to make sure everything is not lopsided. We want to make sure it's all straight. And then I'm just basting this in place. Now we're making the slip pocket that goes on the inner lining of the organizer. You can see there are 4 pieces. I used 2 different prints for mine. And you are going to clip this together, right sides together. You're going to sew all around, leaving a small opening to turn this right side out. And I'm just going to show you one of these. They're both made the exact same way. And again, don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and end of your seam. And there you go. Now we need to press our seams open, and that's a little tricky in this situation. So you're going to press one seam allowance at a time. So one single piece of fabric. You can see right there that I did that. You're just folding it over, and then flipping it over and folding that other part of the seam allowance and just ironing it in place. This is going to give you a more crisp edge. And I'm doing this on all 4 sides, including the one with the opening. So you want to make sure that your seam allowance is consistent so you get a very straight looking rectangle. You don't want a goofy shape for your pocket. And it's all 4 sides, and then after this, you want to clip the corners so you can get a nice crisp corner. And that's what I'm doing. It's a little bit difficult because you've ironed it all out of the way. Just get those things clipped. And then at this point, I like to keep things neat, so I just picked up all the little triangles, threw them away, and then I'm turning this right side out. And then I'm using a turning tool. This just came with a bag of fiber fill, so I have a few of these. And then just press everything in place. Get a nice crisp fold on all 4 sides. Then once it's all pressed, you're going to top stitch along the top edge of the pocket. So if you're using a directional print, you want to make sure that it's going in the correct direction. So decide which side will be on top. And then that opening right there, that will be closed when you stitch the slip pocket onto your lining panel. Now here's that lining panel. Then you're going to use the measurements provided in the pattern to determine where exactly to place that slip pocket. And then just use some pins to hold it in place. And then you're going to stitch down one side, across the bottom, and then up the other side. Don't forget to backstitch. want to make sure that seam is secure because pockets tend to be pulled on quite a bit. Back stitch again. And then now you want to divide up your pockets. There are dimensions for each of these slip pockets in the pattern, but feel free to change these to accommodate whatever you plan on storing in these pockets. For this one right here, I'm using the measurements given in the pattern to divide this single slip pocket into 3 separate pockets. And then the other one is going to be just sewn down the middle to make 2 compartments. And don't forget to trim any hanging threads. And then here I am attaching the second pocket. I find it easiest just to snip all the little loose threads as I go along instead of having to do it all at the end. So once I'm done with a project, I just want to move on to the next one. So I like to just admire my work and move on to the next thing, not have to worry about clipping threads. This is the same exact process as before. Make sure your seam allowance is consistent. And then to mark this, I'm using a Pilot friction pen, and this is a heat erasing pen. Before you use this though, you want to check on a scrap of your particular fabric just to make sure that it doesn't leave any ghosting type of residue afterwards. There are some fabrics that will do that, so you just want to check and be on the safe side. And those are our lining main panels all finished. Now I am making the second pocket with the zipper. So these clear rulers, I have a link to these below in the description also. Since they have that see-through grid on them, it makes it very easy to get a nice straight line. I'm just taking one of the panels that I put a slip pocket on and pinning this pocket lining into place. And again, shorten your stitch length to about a 2 and sew all the way around that rectangle. Don't forget to back stitch when you're finished. And then I am cutting along that center line that I drew in the little V, going right up to that stitching in each corner, being extremely careful not to cut the actual stitching. And then again, we're pushing that pocket lining to the inside, or the wrong side of our panel. And then this time I just am rolling the seam between my fingers to try to flatten it out. And then this time I skip the pins just to show you an additional way in case you don't have the option of pinning everything down. Like if your ironing surface doesn't have the ability to do that. And I'm just going little by little. Just working on one small section at a time, moving the whole piece around so I can get a better visibility. And then I'm just taking a look at it on the right side, making sure I don't have any wrinkles or anything like that. You want to make sure that your opening is nice and even. And then here's some more double-sided tape. Apply another zipper. This double-sided tape is extremely handy for this situation. But of course, once again, you can always use fabric glue. Fabric glue is a little bit more inexpensive than the double-sided tape, just a bit less convenient. And then I'm pressing it into place. Then be sure to change your stitch length. Mine is at a 3. Then backstitch and sew along that opening. So then your zipper is permanently attached. I use the edge of my presser foot as a guide, so I have a consistent seam. And then we need to fold our pocket lining up to create the actual pocket. And if your work isn't perfect here, don't sweat it too much. This pocket is on the inside of another pocket. Therefore, not many people are going to see it. But you're getting lots of great practice in making these pockets with zippers. Don't forget to use the correct seam allowance as mentioned in the pattern and backstitch. And there you go, you've got another pocket. Now we have all the panels completed. It's just a matter of sewing them all together and adding our zipper at the top. What I'm doing right here is I have folded the ends of the zippers at a 45-degree angle, and I'm stitching that into place. Another alternative to this would be to use zipper tabs. That's not mentioned in the pattern, but if you have some experience with those, you can easily adapt the pattern to have zipper tabs instead. And there it is. The next thing to do is to attach that zipper to the exterior panel. So you're going to clip that on, make sure the zipper is face down, and then center it on that opening, and then use clips. Again, you don't want to use pins on a zipper because it tends to give you a wavy result. You don't want that. So just clip it into place, and you're going to base this. The seam allowance is mentioned in the pattern. So you're just temporarily holding this in place because now you're going to take one of your lining panels and put that over the top, right sides together. The zipper is sandwiched in between, and you're going to clip those two components together and then put your stitch length back to your typical one. So for me it was a 3. And then you're just going to sew that all together. I like to use a lot of pins, or clips rather, to make sure everything is in place and doesn't shift in any way. And back stitch. You might have to pull your zipper open and shut to keep it the zipper head out of the way as you're sewing. And you can see I'm very carefully sewing this, or pressing this rather. Watch out for the zipper. You don't want to melt it by keeping the iron on it too long, and you also don't want to touch that mesh with your iron either because you can melt it. Just be very mindful of that when you're pressing. Now the next step is to top stitch the zipper to the exterior panel only, So keep the lining out of the way. Then we're going to do the exact same thing on the other panel. It'll just be a little bit more complicated because half of our organizer is attached to the other side of the zipper. So just clip that into place, switch to a basting stitch, and baste that zipper into place. Here I'm just fiddling with it a little bit because those zipper ends need to stay at that 45-degree angle. And then you're taking your final lining panel and clipping that to the zipper again. The fabrics need to be right sides together with the zipper sandwiched in between. Go back to your regular stitch length and sew everything together. We are almost done. Make sure everything is nice and flat and press it. It's a little easier on this side because we don't have the mesh pocket. And then top stitch right along the zipper. Again, you're keeping the lining out of this seam. And there you go. Now we need to do one final assembly step here. So you can see what we've got. You need to open the zipper halfway and then put the two exteriors facing each other, right sides together, and the two lining panels, right sides together. Then we're going to use a lot of clips to clip everything together, and then make sure you leave an opening at the bottom of that lining so you can turn this entire project right side out after you've stitched it. So you can see here I'm marking that opening so I don't forget or make it too small or too large. And then I'm matching up these side seams right here. It's very important that those match up correctly because that is the top of your organizer. So it's going to be very, very visible. Sometimes what I'll do is I will use the red clips to denote an area that I need to take special care of when I'm sewing. So those two seams right there that need to match up, I'll stop and I'll kind of check and make sure that everything is aligned correctly before I sew those seams. And I'm also using the red clips where I need to start and stop my seam. Don't forget to backstitch. And then just remove those clips as you go. Make a note of the seam allowance in the pattern. I'm just going back over that one seam because it was not correct in that spot, so I just needed to stitch it again. Almost to the end. Make sure your needle's down when you're pivoting. Alright, so now I've got my consistent seam allowance, and then you need to clip the corners and then trim down the seam allowance. You can see I'm doing that right there. I did edit some of this out, so you get the idea though. And then that opening where you turn, make sure you do not trim there. So now we need to turn this whole thing. When you reach in there, you can kind of move the zipper open more, so it'll be easier to turn everything right side out. So it's going to look like a hot mess for a minute here. And then we need to poke out the corners. That's what I'm doing right there. I'm going to use my turning tool again. Don't use anything too sharp, otherwise it could poke through your fabric and put a hole in your project, and that would be sad. And then I'm just closing that opening right there. And then you just push that lining portion right there into the main part of the organizer. The turning tool can be handy for this as well. And you can see it's all done right there. We just need to do a little bit of pressing. Again, make sure you don't melt your mesh or your zipper. Keep the iron away from the mesh altogether, and then when you're ironing near the zipper, don't hold it over that zipper for too long. You don't want to melt your fabric or your zipper. So you can see I'm just giving everything a good press at the end, removing all the wrinkles, just giving it a nice professional looking finish and avoiding that mesh. Check this out. I have this thing filled with the contents of my purse, and there are still pockets to spare. So let me show you this. On the outside, I've got my phone. In this pocket right here, I don't even have anything. I ran out of things to put in this thing. So I have my hand sanitizer, I have a car key, hair ties, and then around the back I have business cards and a small notebook. Then in the inner compartment, I've got a pen, a snack, a lipstick, I've got some breath mints, and then I have my wallet, which is the Essex wallet, which is also a Sotak pattern, and here it is. It's all done. If I had to do it over, I would put zipper tabs at the top for a neater look. Otherwise, I like this exactly the way it was written. This is one of those projects that makes a great gift because it's something that pretty much anyone who carries a bag can use. And you can also make this out of a lot of fun fabrics that you may not otherwise use for a bag. So you could really make it customized for the recipient. Well, I hope you found this video for the Sotak Patterns Purse Organizer helpful. If you did, please click the like button below, and if you're not yet a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you get notified the next time I make a video. Thanks for watching.